look at on Wednesday, we're now looking at today, and what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at Wednesday. In other words, I switched the plans, and Wednesday night is going to be dealing with addictions, things like that, and how to deal with people. So be here Wednesday night for that. And I thought it'd be more appropriate on Sunday morning for Sunday school to do this next. I've been wanting to do it again. It's been 10 years since I did anything on the King James. Now, when I mean talking about King James himself, we're going to start off with him. It's going to progress into dealing with, and this time I'm not going to bog you down with a bunch of versions. We're going to look at just two, because basically there's two out there, well, three. There's three out there that are more of a thorn in our side than any other of the others. They're the most widely sold and the most passed off as being the Word of God, but we'll get to that, and that's going to take some time. What we're going to do this morning is we're going to talk about the origin of where our Bible came from and the man that God chose to bring that about. And of course, that'd be King James. And I hate doing genealogies, especially when you got a guy that's got 6 wives, you know what I mean? And we're going to have to start with him, Henry VIII. Henry VIII, he couldn't get a male heir from his first wife, so he wanted to divorce her and marry somebody else that could give him, you know, it's the continuation of his kingdom, and he wanted a king on the throne. So he wanted to do this, but he had to ask permission from the Catholic Church to divorce and to remarry and all that stuff to get the first marriage annulled or whatever they were going to do with it. And the woman that he was married to had some ties with the emperor at Rome, who had some close ties with the Vatican and the Pope, and because of the pressure, they refused him permission. Well, this angered him anyway, because, you know, here you've got a church telling a king what he can do in his own country. And that just angered him. And I'm not going to tell you that Henry VIII was a good dude. No way, man. No way. This guy was reprehensible, man. But anyway, he ends up kicking out the Catholic Church. Literally passed a law that gave him supremacy over the church, and pretty much just booted Rome right out of England. And that's probably one of the best moves that any king ever made, because a lot of them followed suit. A lot of nations at that time were going through the Reformation, started kicking out Rome, because Rome was literally it controlled all of Europe. And I mean, when they controlled kings, listen, they controlled who they married and who they could divorce. They controlled all kinds of things. Well, anyway, that was a good move. So Henry he gets rid of Rome and he starts marrying, okay? And, you know, he had 6 total, but one of those, and I think it might have been Jane Seymour, gave him an heir, Edward VI, okay? So Edward ended up taking the throne from King James. The only problem was that Edward was a hemophiliac, and he only lived for from the time he got on the throne, he was only on the throne for 5 years, and we're talking he was 15 or 16 when he died. I believe that's how old he was. So, you know, he wasn't really running things anyway, probably at that age, but it was short-lived. Well, then there was this mad dash, you know, we can't have, yeah. No, I'm sorry, from Henry. Did I say James?
You did, but that's okay.
Okay, yeah. Henry, King Henry VIII. So after Edward dies, the monarchy panics. I mean, they don't want a Roman Catholic back in there. And so they throw in Lady Jane Grey. Lady Jane Grey is like, she is a great niece of Henry VIII. It's one of his sisters. I mean, they really had to dig far, dig long. You know, she's only about 15, 16, 17 years old. And they hook her up with this guy named Dudley no, his name wasn't Dumore or Do Better. Dudley was his name. And she's only queen for 9 days, because she didn't have the backing and the support, so she was kind of ousted, and Mary I comes to the throne. And Mary She is from the first wife, and she is a dyed-in-the-wool Roman Catholic. And because of that, she has Lady Jane Grey, who is a Protestant. She has Lady Jane Grey and her husband Dudley, and she has them executed. That's one of the things that happens. This is who we call Bloody Mary, Mary the First. Bloody Mary burned or executed 300 Protestants, and that's probably a low number, when she came to the throne. She actually was in the process of reversing the Reformation. And she was there for 5 years. By the grace of God, she was smitten with something. They still don't know. It's a mystery illness. She had all kinds of weird things happen, man. I think this woman was, she was evil. And she ended up dying after about 5 years on the throne. She'd done a lot of damage in that 5 years. So after she died, then miraculously, who no one thought would ever be queen, and whom had spent time in the tower locked up by Mary. I mean, Mary locked Elizabeth in the tower. I mean, they had, one of them, it's interesting to see, this one came from the first wife, and I can't remember that, Erdogan or something like that, I can't remember, but Elizabeth came from somebody else. Catherine of Aragon, that's the first wife. And that's who Bloody Mary came from. Elizabeth, I'm trying to remember now. So many names. Anyway, not the same mother, okay? Same father. Actually, Elizabeth is, we're okay. She is a daughter. All right, so before we go for that, after Elizabeth, King James I shows up. Now, we'll get to that. Now we got to go to the other side of the tracks and look at James' side. I'm probably blocking this thing here where nobody can see it. And Elizabeth and King James are cousins, kind of twice removed. And how they became cousins is Henry has a sister whose name was Margaret Tudor. And Margaret was married off to James IV of Scotland. Remember, we got England and we got Scotland is still kind of separated from this thing. And then after James IV, these two married, they produced James V. And James V was born to him Mary, Queen of Scots. That is King James' mother right there. That's James Stuart's mother. That's their last name, Stuart. And Mary became Queen of the Scots for a while. And this is King James' mother, by the way, who is another dyed-in-the-wool Roman Catholic, because she was raised, I believe, in France. So she wasn't good either. It may have been Mary. I get these two Marys mixed up, but both of them were Roman Catholic, and both of them worked against the throne. Mary, Queen of Scots, tried to have Elizabeth killed on numerous attempts. She ends up getting locked up in the tower for like 19 years, and finally Elizabeth has her executed, because I think she's even working from the tower, because she knows that she could ascend the throne if she can get rid of Elizabeth. So she works to try to get her killed, so I want you to see this. Elizabeth had King James' mother executed, and then Elizabeth chose King James to replace her. One is a Tudor and one is a Stuart. It was just, some of these things that happened are unbelievable. Now, they say that, they asked Elizabeth, who do you want to succeed you? And, she's like, she makes like a crown movement. Well, they know that the people behind Elizabeth that were working behind the scenes for several years had been preparing James. And it's because Elizabeth had some sense, and she could recognize a decent man when she saw one, and she could also recognize that he was definitely not going to be Roman Catholic. He was a Protestant. And that's why he chose. But you would have thought, James would have had angst against her. You killed Mom. No. In fact, we're going to see that King James never knew his parents. So after Mary, Queen of Scots, has been locked up and everything, James the Sixth, it's the same King James, he's the sixth of Scotland. James the Sixth of Scotland becomes King James the First of England. Okay? So he comes to the throne there, and he's only like, I'm going to say 12 months old. He's just a baby, and he's king. So, the country's being run by somebody else. And I don't know how many years later, could be 20. I'll have to see my notes how old James is when he actually ascends the English throne there. But he is literally anointed king the very same day that Elizabeth dies. And this is one of the most incredible stories about a monarchy, and the lies that are told, they're horrible. Okay. We just had the 400th anniversary here. It's actually been a lot of years. Man, it's been 15 years ago. It seemed like it just happened. In 2011, from 1611 to 2011, 400-year anniversary. Turn to Ecclesiastes 8:4, and this is the verse that's going to show you why all this is important. Ecclesiastes 8:4. Did that make sense to everybody, what I just explained on the board there for the most part? Okay. Because I'm beginning to wonder if Anne Boleyn was Elizabeth. She was the second wife, and that was Elizabeth's mother. And she was also executed. But I think it was King Henry VIII, that had her executed. He had two of his wives executed. He divorced two, killed two, and the last one survived him, but I'll tell you what, man, he was something else. Anyway, Ecclesiastes 8:4 says, where the word of a king is, there is power. And who may say unto him, what doest thou? When you've got a king that has, and I'm not talking about a king attached to a prime minister, but I mean a king. What are you going to tell him? You're going to tell him what he can or cannot do? A king does what he wants. He has ultimate power. And he says, where the word of a king is, there is power. There is only one Bible that I know of that exists that was authorized by a king. And that was the King James Bible. Everything else is by somebody else, some printing company or some man or whatever, but wasn't a king. And I think that verse speaks volumes. Where the word of a king is, there's power. You want power, you're going to have the word of a king. And King James was one of the finest kings England ever had. No doubt about it. Now, he's not talked about like that because, there's a lot of anti-sentiment against him because he was so against Rome. There's a reason why he was against Roman Catholicism. A really good reason. If he wasn't against them to the extreme to begin with, he ended up being against them to the extreme. King James was known as Great Britain's Solomon while he was yet alive. He was the first to call the empire Great Britain. Now, that ended up getting validated later, but he called it Great Britain. Because now you've got, remember, he's King James I of England, Ireland, Scotland. I think that's the grouping there. So that's why they call it Great Britain, because it included Ireland and Scotland. He reigned for 22 years, and he never had a war. They enjoyed peace in the land. Let me tell you something. That's worth having right there. I could give you some, I'll get on down through here. We'll talk about the things he was able, because he was so such an intelligent man, he was able to do a lot of the work by himself without a bunch of interpreters and, liaisons. He did it himself, and he achieved quite a bit. So he reigned for 22 years in England. He kept taxation low, and commerce began to flourish under his reign. In other words, he just wasn't taxing these people to death like some of these kings did. He was trying to help them. He was trying to grow an economy. His crowning achievement would be the authorizing of a new translation of the Bible into the English vernacular to be made available to every Englishman. Now, there were some English versions already in existence. They were choppy at best. They needed work. They may have leaned one way or the other. You've got two groups. You've got the Anglican, and then you've got the Puritans. Okay, they're doctrinally opposed to one another, but it's a Puritan that makes the suggestion. It's King James that makes the decision. And you've got these Puritans and these Anglicans coming together to do this translation. And I think it's kind of funny. You got a Calvinist and an Arminian getting together and making a Baptist Bible with eternal security in it. Yes. It's how you kind of know that, listen, they say, well, you Baptists that believe the Bible, not one Baptist was on the translating committee that I know of. They were either Puritans or they were Anglicans. There was no Baptist. So you can't say that, we like our own book. This is not ours. In fact, it didn't come from America either. It came from England. So that was his crowning achievement. Let's see. So at the time, only churches had the Bible in English being roughly translated due to the work of Wycliffe and Tyndale, which was no small thing. What they did was incredible. You had the Great Bible, the Geneva Bible, the Bishop's Bible, and the Coverdale Bible. And the problem with those also was they were only in the churches. So if you want to go read a Bible, you had to go inside a church, and you're probably lucky to have access to it. King James his goal was to put the Word of God into the hand of every Englishman. Everybody would have access to the Bible. You know why he did that? Because he just saw about, he has in the rearview mirror 1,000 or 1,500 years, 1,000 years of the Dark Ages when the Bible wasn't available. And you just had to take the word of a priest. That's the reason why. The King James Version of the Bible would circle the globe and change the world drastically for the next 300 to 400 years. Still changing the world. It's just that there's so many counterfeits of the Bible out there that the church doesn't even know which one it is anymore. They're just like, you just keep buying them and buying them and buying them, and this one's better. Why? Oh, we found something in the dirt over here, and it says this. This one's more readable. This one's, I don't serve a God like that. I can see God's purpose in a lot of things, and I can definitely see his purpose in all this. Where the word of a king is, there's power. Well, let's talk about the child king, King James VI of Scotland. Born James Charles Stuart, June the 19th, 1566, at Edinburgh Castle in Scotland. That's where King James was born, James Charles Stuart. James's father is Lord Darnley, I think it is, Darnley, but I think it's Darnley. And he was murdered before James was 1 year old. His mother, Mary Queen of Scots, ascended the Scottish throne. She was raised by the French, that's the one raised by the French, and was Roman Catholic to the core. Mary Queen of Scots was involved in plots to kill her cousin, Elizabeth, the Queen of England. She was arrested and imprisoned for 19 years and finally executed for her part in the conspiracy. That's kind of interesting. Verse over there in Hebrews 7:3 says, without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth the priest continually. And it's interesting here that King James is without father and without mother. He never knew either of them. One of them was in the Tower in London. The other one was already dead before, he was just I think, a little baby before he's a year old. So James never knew his father or his mother. He ascended the throne at the tender age of 13 months. I don't know why I told you. I thought 13 months. John Knox, the reformer, preached his coronation on July the 24th, 1567. John Knox was one of those guys that, part of the Reformation. And he was the one instructing this king. You know, the verse over in Galatians chapter 4, verse 1 to 2. Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. And that was the way it was for James. He was under tutors and governors. Well, one of these tutors beat him. If he got out of line, man, he just takes that, them old, them sticks they got to point on the board. He just lay into him. So he had discipline. He wasn't raised like some spoiled king that thinks they can do anything, or like a lot of the popes. You need to read the history of the popes, man. You never read anything like it in your life. There's people in prison, the worst in prison that were better than that lot. Anyway, so John Knox, the reformer, preached his coronation on July 24th, 1567. And he was the one that helped teach the king. He had 4 tutors, one of which would have a very profound influence on his life. I take that back. I'm not sure that John Knox was a tutor. He was the reformer that preached his coronation. The tutor was a guy named Mr. George Buchanan. I'm sorry, I got that mixed up. Now, he was a staunch Calvinist. Listen, there's a lot of things. When you read about Martin Luther, he's got a book out called The Bondage of the Will. I would let that man in the back door of this church. And he started the Reformation. I wouldn't let him be a member here. Why? Because his doctrine is so far off, man. Guy was amillennial. He leaned toward Calvinism. But if you look at the light that he's got versus the Catholic Church in the Dark Ages, they're light years ahead. Things gradually start being exposed. The more the Bible is circulated, the more that it's read, the more that the common people have it, the more people that can study it, the more revelation they get. And you can't just go back and say, well, they did this, they couldn't have been right. No. Everything is by degrees. Listen, if the Lord tarries and another 50 years goes by, there'll be a lot more revelation from the Bible than there was that came from this place or that place. Why? Because God's still revealing it. And you can't get to the end of it. But they drug a lot of doctrine from the Dark Ages. And Calvinism was one of them. There's many of them that believed in water baptism. There's many of them that believed in, they believed in still having priests. There was a lot of things that needed to be corrected, and they were. Once the Reformation took place, man, the Word of God caught fire. And there was only one Bible circulating at that time all over the world, and that was the King James Bible. There may have been one of those Coverdales or great Bibles here and there, but it's mainly the King James Bible that goes all over the world. So Mr. George Buchanan, staunch Calvinist, he was relentless in his teaching and training of young James, and that's where I've got beatings were common. You can't imagine here you got a king. He was king from 12 months old, or 13 months. And then the teacher beats him. Why? He's to train this child. James became fluent in Greek, Latin, French, English, and Scots. I guess that'd be Gaelic. I wonder if that's Gaelic. Huh? They got their own language, Scots? I don't know. It's interesting. He was also schooled in Italian and Spanish, so he's fluent in 5 languages and fluent in 2. Fluent in 5. King James seldom needed translators to conduct affairs of state. They came in there, man, he could understand every word they were saying. He was fluent in 5 languages. He could speak it like his native tongue. He is considered one of the most educated monarchs to reign over England. Well, we know that's a lot of the kings that were over England were dummies. I mean, they weren't very smart at all. I don't know if the one they got's any smarter, but we'll see. And James began his rule of Scotland at age where he was ruling, not that he was king, at 19 as James VI of Scotland. So at 19 years of age, they handed the reins to him and they said, okay, go get him. In the meantime, while he is beginning his rule at 19, Queen Elizabeth's been on the throne for a while, and she's his aunt, kind of. I got that right? Okay. So Elizabeth Tudor, a daughter of Henry VIII, ascended the throne after her sister, Mary Tudor, a.k.a. Bloody Mary, died of cancer. Now, there's some things about whether it was cancer, influenza. Like I said, she had some crazy things happen to her. She had supposedly 2 pregnancies where she literally swelled and everything, and there was nothing there twice, which is kind of weird. But she ends up dying. Elizabeth was the opposite of her and suffered imprisonment at her hand for a while. Bloody Mary instituted intense persecutions against Protestants, which is how she got her name. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Elizabeth. Elizabeth was declared illegitimate even before her coronation. Why don't I call her, probably because Boleyn was executed, her mother. And the bishop, or Catholic bishops, denied to attend her coronation. Now you got to remember, she's being coronated, but who has just been in there before her? Bloody Mary. So what have you got? You've got all these Catholics that are in place, that she's put back in place. And they denied to attend her coronation. I think they had one out of all of them agree to attend. Elizabeth asked that bishop not to elevate the host. You know what I mean by the host? The wafer. But he refused and did anyway, and Elizabeth walked out. Because a piece of bread can't save you. You can shove that thing in your mouth and you could eat a whole pack of them, and it's not going to save you. It's not through some piece of bread. And he elevated the host, and this is the body of Christ, it's like. It would be the last coronation in England using a Latin service, but for the exception of George I. And Queen Elizabeth she severed communion with the Roman Catholic Church with England. So she's going back to separating them completely. In 1559, the Reformation bill to create a new church was put before Parliament. 2 acts soon followed. The Act of Supremacy, which put the head of state as the head of the church. Now, if I understand right, Henry had already done that, and she probably, Mary probably nixed it, and then they had to bring it back and put it back in. So there's the Act of Supremacy and the Act of Uniformity. In other words, you would have to attend an Anglican church on Sunday. Now, you're thinking about this, you're going, well, that doesn't seem right. Nothing's perfect here, okay? Now we would look at England and a king running the church, and we'd be going, no. A government running the church? No. We know they're supposed to be separated from that. They were trying to separate themselves from a pope with absolute authority. They were trying to separate from them, and in doing so, they didn't get it perfect by a long shot, but they were still light years farther than what they should have been, or than what they were before. So Elizabeth published the 39 Articles of Religion. I have read them. Very boring. And And it defines once and for all Anglican belief. Some of it is doctrinally unsound, yet a watershed of truth compared to the Dark Ages. There's 39 articles of confession, and I believe they're still in power to this day for the Church of England. Elizabeth was officially excommunicated by Pope Pius V in 1569. And Elizabeth never married, and that's why she's called the Virgin Queen. Well, we get the first colony of Virginia was named in her honor. She's the Virgin Queen. Her last act was to pass her scepter to her nephew, King James VI of Scotland, who believed as she did, not being reigned over by a pope. And that's how they kept this thing so secret that when she's on her deathbed and about to breathe her last breath, they send writers to James. And I guess at almost the moment she dies, they're aware of it or whatever, and or they leave right after she dies, and they tell him that very day, you're the King of England. And he comes in and is probably anointed where he's at, right there in Scotland. So he becomes King James I of England, King James VI of Scotland. And it was on March 24th, 1603, that King James VI of Scotland would be anointed King James I. He was anointed the same day in which Elizabeth died. James would rule England, Ireland, Scotland for 22 years, all peaceful. He designed the Union Jack. I didn't know that. That's the flag. Combining the crosses of England, Ireland, and Scotland. I didn't know that. King James had not ruled 1 year before the suggestion was made for a new translation of the Bible in English to be available to every subject. That was in January 1604. I mean, he'd not even been in a year when somebody made that suggestion. None of the translators were paid. I'll bet that's not going on today. None of the translators were paid. They were required to make it on their own. You know how long it took them? 7 years. And they were required to make it on their own. Many of them were like bishops or something. Some of them were, some of them weren't. But they were told to make it on their own. The work took 7 years to complete and was made available the 8th year. King James was an avid and serious writer, poet. His works are still available today. I've read a little bit of them. That's in that Old English. The True Law of Free Monarchs, also known as the Divine Right of Kings, 279 pages. The Basilicon Doron, or the Royal Gift, that was a private writing to his son on how to rule, and they ended up publishing it, and I think it went all over the world practically. King James also wrote a scathing tract against tobacco and warned of its serious risk called Counterblast to Tobacco. He hated it. And that fellow named Rawlings, you know. You used to see that. You still see the cigars with the Rawlings. What is it? Yes. He's the one that introduced it from, I guess, the New World or whatever, brought it back, and James hated it. He said, "But you all stink." Anyway, the complete works of King James number 621 pages, and much of it commentary on biblical books such as Revelations, Matthew, and James. So he was avidly in his Bible, whichever one he was using at the time, and did a lot of commentary on it. He did not participate in any of the translation, though. Several plots were contrived against King James, none so famous as the gunpowder plot. And it's funny that few Americans know about this, but the gunpowder plot was a couple Jesuits got together with 13 conspirators, and they took 36 barrels of gunpowder and they put it under the Parliament building. There's this basement access, you know, and they put it down in there, 36 barrels, and they waited for what they call the parliamentary, where they open Parliament for the year. I think Congress has something like that, but they would open Parliament for the year, And everybody was present. The king would have been present. His family would have been present. You would have had heads of state were present. You had your, whatever, if you had Senate representatives, whatever those two groups were, they were present. The two houses of parliament were present. Then you would have had, because he's the king of England, or the king of the church, right? He's the head of the church. You would have had all these bishops. You know who's sitting there? The translators to the King James Bible are sitting in that opening of Parliament. And there are 36 barrels of gunpowder in the basement. And a fellow named Guy Fawkes is getting ready to light the fuse when they caught him. It was going to be that day. It was within an hour or two of the whole thing, and it's going to light that, and it's going to blow them all to pieces. And they caught him. And they tortured him. They got the name of the conspirators, and it was run by about 2 or 3 Jesuits. And I'll tell you what a Jesuit is in a minute. So the bomb placement was under Parliament, and to this day, they check that, or to this very year, they check it when they open Parliament. They go down and check the basement. Guy Fawkes, one of the conspirators, caught in the act of detonating the bomb. King James, the Queen, the members of Parliament would have been killed, along with many, if not all, of the King James translators who would have attended. If this bomb on November the 5th, 1605, exploded, the entire British government would have been killed, and the King James Bible work would most likely have ceased. That's why they say, remember, remember the 5th of November. It's the gunpowder plot. We've celebrated it in our church. We had a bonfire and everything. They had bonfires throughout England when they celebrate this, and they burn effigies to Guy Fawkes and the Pope, because they know the Pope was behind it. The Pope was trying to murder a sovereign, and their agents are the Jesuits. Okay, Guy Fawkes Day. You know the mask where the guy's got the little squinty eyes and little mustache, you know? That's Guy Fawkes. That's his face. And now it's used in rebellion. It's used to I don't know, sedition. That's his face. Let's see. The Roman Catholic Niccolo Molin, if I got that pronounced right, or Niccolo, an ambassador, said this of King James. He is a Protestant. The king tries to extend his Protestant religion to the whole island. The king is a bitter enemy of our religion, Roman Catholic. He frequently speaks of it in terms of contempt. He is the harsher because of this last conspiracy, the gunpowder plot. He's harsher now. Well, yeah, you tried to kill him and his family. He understood that the Jesuits had a hand in it. Oh, yes, he did. King James said this in his gift that he wrote to his son, this Basilicon Doron. It says, I am no papist, as I said before. Now faith is the free gift of God, as Paul saith. It must be nourished by prayer, which is nothing else but friendly talking to God. Use oft to pray when you are quiet, especially in your bed. So when he talks about, he says, I'm not a papist. Now faith is the free gift of God. Why? Because Roman Catholicism teaches a work salvation system. All right. Let me talk to you a little bit about the slander. I'm cutting through a lot of the history, but the slander that was against King James. The accusation would come 25 years after James's death that he was a homosexual. Now, how would you like to be dead 25 years, somebody just pop up and say something wicked about you? Now, proof? There's no proof. There's just the accusation. The accuser was a guy named Sir Anthony Weldon, who was tossed from the king's court for racist remarks against the king's native people, the Scots. This guy hated the Scots. Here's what he says about them. Their flesh naturally abhors cleanness. In other words, they run from a bath. Their breath commonly stinks of pottage. to be chained in marriage with one of them were to be tied to a dead carcass and cast into a stinking ditch. I do wonder that King James should be born in so stinking a town as Edinburgh in lousy Scotland. Think he was a fan? And I'll tell you, say, well, can you prove he's not? I got more proof that he's not than this guy ever has that he was. He just made an accusation 25 years after his death, and nobody can collaborate because there's no evidence of any of it. But here's the evidence against it. James was married to Lady Anne of Denmark and fathered 9 children with her. Okay? Not 1 or just 2, but 9. He wrote love poetry to his queen, to whom he delighted. And the king wrote to his son to abstain from fornication. And he mentioned sodomy as an unforgivable sin. And that's in the excuse me, in the Basilicon Dawn, that gift thing. What did I say that was? Yeah, gift of rule or something like that. And he says here, and I'm trying to read Old English here, but as this severe justice of yours upon all offenses would be but for a time, as I have already said, so is there some horrible crimes that ye are bound in conscience never to forgive, such as witchcraft, willful, and he says murder, and he's talking about murder. I mean, this thing's murder, incest, especially within the degrees of like consanguinity, consanguinity, sanguinity, consanguinity. Definition? Oh. Okay. And then the next one, now these are things he tells him never to forgive: sodomy, poisoning, and false coin. We'd have to eliminate Congress, the president, and the vice president, everybody in our government for false coin. Anyway. So that's what for a guy that, was a sodomite, he sure was unforgiving for sodomy. See what I mean? 9 children, and the man was a hunter. He hunted. So that don't mean anything. Yeah, it does. The reason I know he's a hunter is because his wife accidentally shot his dog. And it took a while for him to forgive her, but he did. Yep. Evidently, she liked to hunt too, but she wasn't as good as he was. Killed his dog. And it says the fact that James filled his court with male buddies does not mean he was a queer. Well, I get on down through here. I put down he's an avid hunter. He ran with William Shakespeare, who wrote Macbeth in his honor. So his buddies was William Shakespeare and the troupe, the ones that were connected with him. That was his buddies that he ran with. And of course, the man's not perfect. He was known for given to levity. He liked to laugh and enjoy himself. He was a very sickly man, though. Everything you ever see King James looked like a stick figure. Pale. They got that reddish hair, Scots hair. He just kind of pale and pasty face looking. That's because he was never well his entire life. He died in his 60s, I think. The king wrote concerning his enemies, they quarrel me, not for any evil or vice in me, but because I was a king, which they thought the highest evil, and because they were ashamed to profess this quarrel, they were busy to look narrowly into all my actions. And I warrant you a mote in my eye. Yes, a false report was matter enough for them to work upon. In other words, he knew that they were making false reports about him and blowing it up. The same thing happens today with these people in government. Sir Henry Wotton, W-O-T-T-O-N, said this of King James in 1602. There appears a certain natural goodness verging on modesty. He wears short hair. Among his good qualities, none shines more brightly than chasteness of his life, which he has preserved without stain down to the present time, contrary to the example of almost all his ancestors who disturbed the kingdom with a great number of bastards which they left. Sir Roger Wilbraham wrote of King James in 1603, "The king is of the sharpest wit and invention, of the sweetest, most pleasant, and best nature that ever I knew, desiring nor affecting anything but true honor." He died at 58, March 27, 1625. And like I said, he was sick just about all his life, very thin man. King James was the founding monarch of the United States. He himself ordered, wrote, and authorized the evangelistic grant charter to settle the colony of Virginia. People don't realize our founding king was King James, the one that authorized the King James Bible. He says this is what he wrote on the colony of Virginia, to make habitation, ... and to deduce a colony of sundry of our people into that part of America commonly called Virginia, and propagating of the Christian religion to such people as yet live in darkness. And so he was for evangelizing the Indians, to bring a settled and quiet government. Jamestown, Virginia was named in his honor, along with the James River, Jamestown Island, James Fort, James City, etc. All that was to honor James, and then Virginia was to honor Elizabeth. Most of you know that? I went through high school, I never knew that. Nobody ever said that. I'm thinking, what's Virginia named after, And you think, well, virgin, but who? Jamestown, never connected it to him. Anybody connect Jamestown to him? I never did. Okay, I'm going to stop with that. I was going to read you the Mayflower Compact, but I'll read that next week to start off with there. That's just a very short history of King James. And there's some other things that we're going to talk about, and I'll start off with that next week. It shows you that God even chose the man's name. There's a reason why it's James. And when you start seeing that, you're like, wow, it's a king, and his name is James. We'll see that next week. All right, anybody got a question or comment?